The necklace broke in the queen's hands with a sound like a snapping bone, and the whole throne hall heard it. Cowrie beads scattered across the polished floor of the palace of Yumyus, rolling between the feet of the gathered court, and in the center of that cold marble, on her knees, was a palace maid named Chidinma. Her head bowed, her wrists trembling, accused before the entire kingdom of stealing the queen's jewels. Quinojugo stood over her, chest heaving, the torn cord still clutched in her fist. "A thief," she spat, loud enough for every elder to hear. "A common thief who dared to touch what belongs to royalty." But then something fell. From inside the largest carved bead, the one Chidinma had worn against her heart since she was a child, a small object dropped and struck the floor. It was bronze. It was old, and it spun once, twice, before settling flat in the silence. A royal seal, the leopard, and the rising sun, the mark of the true bloodline of Yumyus. The hall went utterly still. The drummers stopped, the whispering stopped. Even the queen's breath seemed to stop, and the king's oldest adviser, a white-haired man who had served 3 generations of the throne, rose slowly from his seat with his hand pressed to his mouth, because he had seen that seal before. 25 years before, on the body of an infant princess who had vanished into the night and was mourned as dead. How does a palace maid beaten, starved, and dragged to her knees as a thief come to carry the lost seal of a kingdom against her heart? To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning, back before the trial, before the necklace, before anyone in that hall knew that the woman they had spent years humiliating was, in truth, the rightful daughter of the throne. This is the story of Chidinma, and it is a story you will not forget. If you are enjoying this story so far, do me one small kindness. Tap the like button, and in the comments, tell me the name of the village or city where you are watching from right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and if you have not yet subscribed, join our family so you never miss what happens next, because what happens next changes everything. In the kingdom of Yumyus, where the great river bent like an elbow around the Red Earth hills, there was a palace of carved doors and golden cloth, and inside it lived a young woman that almost no one truly saw. Her name was Chidinma, though most of the palace simply called her Girl, or You, There, or worse. She was in her late 20s, with a kind of quiet, steady beauty that survives hardship rather than being broken by it. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing the palace floors. Her back was strong from carrying water up the long hill from the river before the first cockcrow. And every morning, while the great house still slept, Chidinma was already awake, sweeping the courtyards, lighting the kitchen fires, and humming softly to herself a song whose words she did not even remember learning. She had come to the palace 8 years earlier, an orphan with nothing but the clothes she wore and a worn necklace of carved beads tied around her neck. The head housekeeper, a hard woman named Mama Yuka, had taken one look at her and decided she would do for the heaviest, lowest work. And so that is what Chidinma had done, year after year, without complaint. To watch her work was to watch a woman who had made peace with a life that had given her nothing. Before the sky had begun to lighten over the hills of Yumyus, Chidinma was already on the path to the river. A great clay pot balanced upon her head, her bare feet finding their way over the cool earth in the dark. She would fill the pot, carry it up the long hill, and pour it into the great vessels of the palace kitchen, and then go back down, and do it again and again, until the sun rose and the rest of the household began to stir. By the time the lesser wives were waking and calling for their breakfasts, Chidinma had already done more work than most of them would do in a week. And yet there was no bitterness in her. That was the thing the cruel ones could never understand. They could pile work upon her, withhold her food, and speak to her as though she were less than the dogs that slept in the courtyard, and still she would rise the next morning and hum softly as she swept. It was as though some part of her knew, without being told, that she was meant for more than this, that the hardship was not the whole of her story but only a chapter she had to pass through. The necklace was the only thing in the world that was truly hers. It had belonged to the woman who raised her, a poor, gentle woman named Mama Equi, who had found Chidinma as an infant and loved her as her own daughter in a small village many days' journey from Yumyus. Mama Equi had been a quiet woman who kept her secrets close, but on the night she died, when Chidinma was only a girl of 12. The old woman had gripped her wrist with surprising strength and pressed the necklace into her hands. "Whatever you do, my child," she had whispered, her eyes bright with fever and fear, "never lose this. Never let it be taken from you. One day it will tell you who you truly are." Chidinma had not understood. She had thought it was the rambling of a dying woman. But she had kept her promise. Through hunger, through the long road to Umuse, through 8 hard years of palace service, she had never once taken off that necklace. She wore it beneath her wrapper, hidden against her heart, where no one could see it. Life in the palace was not kind to her, but Chidinma found her own small ways to survive it. She made a friend of Ada, one of the kitchen girls, who shared her food when Mama Yuka withheld Shidina's portion as punishment for some imagined offense. She befriended the palace's old gateman, who told her stories of the kingdom's history while she rested in the shade. And when the youngest children of the lesser wives wept from loneliness in the evenings, it was Chidinma who went to them. The great palace could be a cold place for a small child whose mother was busy with the politics of the harem, and more than one little one had learned that the maid with the rough hands and the gentle voice would always make time for them. She would gather them close in the dim light of the servants' quarters, and she would sing to them the wordless song that lived somewhere deep inside her, a soft and rising melody that none of them could name but all of them loved, until their tears dried and their small bodies grew heavy with sleep against her. The children did not know it, and neither did she, but the lullaby she sang to comfort them was the very song of a royal house, passed from a queen to the daughter she had lost. There was a goodness in her that the cruelty of the palace could not scrub away, but goodness, in a place like that, is rarely rewarded, and the wrong kind of attention can be more dangerous than any open enemy, because high above the kitchens and the servants' quarters, in the cool and perfumed chambers of the royal family, there lived a woman who had spent 25 years guarding a terrible secret, a woman whose comfort depended entirely on the past staying buried. Her name was Queen Ogiugo, and she was about to notice Chidinma for the very first time. King Obiora of Umuse was an aging man with a heavy heart, and the heaviest thing he carried was grief. Long ago, in the early days of his reign, he had loved a wife named Ades, a woman so gentle and so beloved by the people that they sang her name at festivals. She had given him a daughter, a tiny princess wrapped in royal cloth, and for a brief and shining season the king had believed himself the happiest man alive. Then, in a single terrible night, it had all been taken from him. The infant princess had vanished from the royal nursery, and though the kingdom searched the forests and dragged the river, the child was never found. Queen Ades, broken by the loss, had faded like a flame starved of air, and within 2 years she too was gone. The king had taken a second wife after that Ogiugo, and she had given him sons, but the people whispered, even now, that the king's true heart was buried in a grave beside his lost first wife and the daughter he never found. Queen Ogiugo knew those whispers. She had built her entire life on top of them. What no one in the kingdom knew, what only Ogiugo herself knew, was the truth of that long-ago night. It had not been raiders who took the infant princess. It had been Ogiugo. In those days she had been only a minor wife, ambitious and overlooked, and she had seen clearly that as long as Adiz's daughter lived, no son of hers would ever sit upon the throne of Umuse, so she had paid the royal nursemaid to carry the child away in the dark and be rid of her. She had spread the word of raiders. She had watched Queen Ades die of grief, and she had stepped into the empty place left behind. For 25 years she had ruled as queen, and she had told herself the matter was finished. The child was gone. The nursemaid had fled and never returned. The past was dead and buried. She remembered that night more clearly than she liked to admit. She remembered the cold decision she had made in the dark of her own heart, the silver she had pressed into the nursemaid's hands, the whispered instruction to carry the child far away and never return. She remembered telling herself it was not truly a wicked thing, that she was only protecting her own future, that the world was cruel, and a woman had to seize what she could. She remembered the false grief she had worn at Queen Adiz's side as the kingdom searched the forest, and how easy it had been, in the end, for everyone to believe that raiders had stolen the child away. And she remembered the nursemaid vanishing into the night and never being seen again, which had suited Ogiugo perfectly. A witness fled. For 25 years she had assumed the woman had done as she was paid to do, and then disappeared to spend her silver in some distant place. It had never once occurred to Ojiugo that the nursemaid might have looked into the face of that innocent child and found that she could not do the terrible thing she had been bid to do. And then, one afternoon, Ojiugo passed through the lower courtyard and saw a palace maid laughing with the children, and her blood turned to ice. It was the laugh, and it was the face. For one impossible moment, Ojiugo was looking at Queen Adeas, dead these 23 years, standing alive in the sunlight in a servant's wrapper. The same eyes, the same gentle mouth, the same way of tilting her head when she sang. "Who is that girl?" Ojiugo demanded of the housekeeper, her voice tight. "That is only Chidinma." "My queen," said Mama Yuka. "A maid, an orphan we took in years ago. She is nothing." Ojiugo wanted to believe it. She told herself it was coincidence, that the world was full of pretty faces, that fear was making her foolish. But that night she could not sleep, and in the days that followed she found herself watching the maid, and worse, she found that the king had begun to watch her too. For King Obiora had also seen Chidinma. He had heard her humming in the courtyard, and had stopped, frozen, his old heart lurching, because it was the very song his beloved Adeas used to sing. He did not understand it. He told himself nothing, but more and more often, the king's tired eyes followed the quiet maid across the palace grounds, searching for something he could not name. Ojiugo saw it all, and a cold and certain dread began to grow inside her. The queen had survived 25 years by destroying anything that threatened her throne, and she had just decided that this quiet, kind, harmless maid was the greatest threat she had ever faced. From that day Chidinma's life became a slow and deliberate torment, though she did not understand why. It began with small things. Her water portions were cut. The hardest, filthiest tasks in the palace were given to her, and her alone, scrubbing the cattle pens. Hauling refuse, working from before dawn, until long after the others had gone to rest. Mama Yuka, who took her orders from the queen, found fault with everything Chidinma did. A floor was never clean enough. A pot was never scrubbed enough. A greeting was never humble enough. "You think you are special?" Mama Yuka sneered at her one evening, striking the bowl of food from Chidinma's hands so that it spilled across the ground. "You think because the king's eyes wander to you that you are something more than a servant? You are nothing. You will always be nothing. The sooner you understand that, the better for you." Chidinma knelt and gathered the spilled food in silence. She did not weep. She had learned long ago that her tears only delighted those who caused them. But that night, alone in the dark of the servants' quarters, she pressed the necklace to her lips and whispered to the woman who had raised her. "Mama Equi," she breathed. "What did you mean? Who am I? Truly, because I do not know why they hate me so." The necklace, of course, did not answer. Not yet. The cruelty grew bolder as the weeks passed. Once, in front of a courtyard full of servants, Mama Yuka accused Chidinma of breaking a clay water pot that she had not touched, and ordered her to kneel on the hard ground through the heat of the whole afternoon as punishment. Chidinma knelt without a word while the sun beat down upon her, while the others were forbidden to bring her water, while Mama Yuka watched from the shade to be certain no one showed her mercy. And when at last she was allowed to rise, her legs trembling beneath her, she simply bowed her head, gathered her broom, and returned to her work. Some of the other servants laughed at her. Others looked away in shame, glad it was not them. But a few, the kindest among them, began to whisper that there was something unnatural in the hatred the queen's people aimed at one harmless girl. "What has she ever done to anyone?" Old Ada murmured one evening, pressing a hidden bowl of soup into Chidinma's hands. "It is as though they are afraid of her. But what is there to fear in you, my sister?" Chidinma had no answer. She did not know either. But not everyone in the palace had turned against her. There was an old man named Ichiodera, the king's most trusted adviser. The white-haired elder who had served the throne since before the king himself was crowned. He was a wise and watchful man, and he had begun to notice the quiet cruelty being aimed at one particular maid. More than that, he had begun to notice the maid herself. One afternoon he came upon Chidinma, resting in the shade of the great Iroko tree, exhausted, her necklace for once visible above her wrapper as she fanned herself. The old man's eyes fell upon the carved beads, and something in his memory stirred, faint and far away, like a name on the tip of the tongue. "That is an unusual necklace, child," he said gently. "Where did you come by it?" "It belonged to my mother, Ichi," Chidinma answered, quickly tucking it away. "The woman who raised me, it is all I have of her." The old man studied her face for a long, quiet moment, her eyes, her brow, the line of her jaw, and a strange expression crossed his face. But he said nothing more. He only nodded slowly and walked away, deep in thought. That small kindness gave Chidinma hope, and for a brief time it seemed her fortunes might be turning. For the king himself, unable to resist the pull of the song he kept hearing drifting across the palace grounds, summoned Chidinma to the royal courtyard one evening. She came trembling, certain she had done something wrong, and knelt before the old man with her eyes lowered. But the king only looked at her for a long, searching moment, and then sighed very gently. "They tell me you sing, child." "Sing for me." She sang the wordless song that had always lived inside her, the one she did not remember learning, the one that rose from somewhere deeper than memory. And as the notes drifted up into the evening air, the old king's face changed. His eyes filled. His hands began to shake, for it was the very song that his beloved Adeus used to sing to their infant daughter, a lullaby of their own house that no one outside the royal family had any way of knowing. And here it was, falling from the lips of a palace, made in a servant's wrapper. The king did not understand it. He only knew that his heart, which had been a cold and buried thing for 25 years, was suddenly aching as though the wound were fresh. When she finished, he was silent for a long while. Then he gave her a length of fine cloth as a gift, and told Mama, in a voice that left no room for argument, that the maid was to be treated with care. For a single golden week, Chidinma slept without fear. The cruelty stopped. The king smiled at her. The old adviser watched over her. It seemed, at last, that the storm had passed, but she did not understand what her good fortune looked like from the cool, perfumed chambers above. She did not know that every kindness shown to her drove Queen Ojugo a little closer to the edge. She did not know that the king's tears and the king's gifts were not saving her at all. They were sealing her fate, because Ojiugo had watched the king weep over a servant's song, and in that moment her fear had hardened into something far more dangerous. A decision: the maid would not simply be tormented anymore. The maid would be destroyed. Queen Ojiugo was patient, and she was clever, and she knew that to destroy Chidinma, she could not simply act in anger. She needed the kingdom to turn against the girl. She needed a crime, and so she set her trap. One morning, the palace woke to the sound of the queen's furious wailing. Her most precious jewels, the royal jewels of Yumus, gold and coral and ancient beads passed down through the queens of the kingdom, had vanished from her chamber in the night. The palace was thrown into chaos. Guards were posted at every gate. Every room was searched. Every servant questioned. "Search the quarters of the maid Chidinma," the queen commanded, her eyes glittering with something that looked almost like triumph. "I have long suspected that one of greed and ambition." The guards went to the servants' quarters, and there, wrapped in a cloth and pushed beneath the thin mat where Chidinma slept, they found the queen's missing jewels. Chidinma's world collapsed in an instant. "I did not take them," she cried as the guards seized her arms. "I swear, before the gods and the spirits of my mother, I have never touched the queen's jewels. Someone has placed them there. Please, please, you must believe me." But no one would meet her eyes. The evidence was plain. The jewels were in her quarters, beneath her mat, wrapped as if hidden by her own hand, and a servant accused of stealing from the royal house could expect only one outcome: public disgrace and exile, or worse. Ada, her one true friend, wept openly. The old gateman turned his face away, and Mama Yuka smiled a small, cruel smile, for she had served the queen well. That night Chidinma sat alone in the cold holding room where they had locked her, her knees drawn up to her chest, and for the first time in many years she allowed herself to truly weep. Not for the disgrace, though the disgrace was bitter. She wept because she had spent her whole life trying to be good, trying to earn, through kindness and patience and honest work, a place in a world that kept casting her out, and it had come to this: accused, bound, hated by people she had never wronged. She pressed her face to her knees and wondered, not for the first time, what terrible thing she could have done in some forgotten life to deserve a fate so cruel. It was Ada who came to her in the dark, slipping past the guard with bread hidden in her wrapper. "I do not believe it," the kitchen girl whispered fiercely through the gap in the door. "Not for one moment. You did not take those jewels, and I will say so to anyone who asks, even the queen herself. There is something wrong here, Chidinma. Someone wants you gone, but you are not alone." Those words were the only warmth Chidinma had that long night, and she held to them like a coal against the cold. Only one other person in the palace did not believe it. Ichiodera, the old adviser, stood at the edge of the courtyard and watched the maid being dragged away, and his ancient heart was troubled. He knew this girl. He had watched her for weeks. He had seen 1,000 small acts of goodness in her, and not one shred of greed. A woman who shared her last food with kitchen children and sang 2 lonely babies did not steal a queen's jewels and hide them clumsily beneath her own mat. And there was something else, something he could not stop thinking about. That face, that song, that necklace of carved beads. He went, quietly, to the king. "My king," he said, "I beg you, before you pass judgment on this maid, hear her in open court. Let the whole kingdom witness. There is something about this that is not as it appears." The king, who had wept over the maid's song only days before, and whose heart could not believe she was a thief, agreed. "Let her be brought before the full court," he declared. "Let the matter be heard in the open, before all the elders of Yumyus. I will not condemn her in shadow." And so the trial was set. Queen Ojugo, when she heard, felt a flicker of unease, but only a flicker. A public trial was even better, she told herself. Let the whole kingdom see the maid condemned. Let them watch the girl with Adia's face be cast out forever, so that no one would ever look at her again and wonder. She would stand before them all, the wronged and righteous queen, and she would see this finished once and for all. She did not know that she was about to destroy herself with her own hands. If your heart is with Chidinma right now, if you believe the truth is about to come out, type the word truth in the comments and let me know you are still with her. What you are about to see is the moment everything changes. On the day of the trial, the great throne hall of Yumyus was filled to its walls. The elders came in their finest cloth. The titled chiefs took their seats. The lesser wives and the household and every servant who could find a place crowded along the edges of the hall. Word had spread through the kingdom that a palace maid was to be judged before the king for stealing from the queen, and the people had come to witness it. King Obiora sat upon his carved throne, his face grave and tired. Beside him sat Queen Ojiugo, regal and composed, her hands folded in her lap, the very picture of wounded dignity. And at the king's right hand stood old Ichiodera, silent and watchful, his eyes never leaving the doorway. Then Chidinma was brought in. She walked between 2 guards, her wrists bound, her wrapper stained from the floor of the holding room. But she held her head high. She had wept all her tears in the long night, and now there was only a strange, quiet calm upon her. She knelt in the center of the hall, on the cold marble floor, and waited. The charges were read aloud. The royal jewels, stolen in the night, found beneath the maid's own mat, a crime against the throne itself. "What do you say to this, girl?" the king asked, his voice heavy. "I say I am innocent," my King Chidinma answered, and though her voice trembled, it carried to every corner of the hall. "I have served this palace for 8 years. I have stolen nothing in all that time, not so much as a grain of rice. I did not take the queen's jewels. They were placed beneath my mat, by another hand, by someone who wishes me destroyed. I do not know why. I have never harmed anyone. I only ask, my king, that you look into my heart and see the truth." A murmur went through the hall. Many who looked upon her kneeling, bound, yet unbroken, found it hard to see a thief. But Queen Ojiugo rose from her seat. "Lies," she said coldly, and the murmuring stopped. The jewels were found in her quarters. Is that not proof enough? This girl has grown proud. She has caught the eye of the king with her false sweetness, and she has begun to imagine herself above her station. This is what comes of it: greed and theft and shameless lies before the whole court. She turned to the king, her voice rising. "How much longer will you let a common thief insult the dignity of this throne?" The king hesitated. The evidence was there. The queen's fury was convincing, and the hall waited, holding its breath, for judgment to fall. An old chief among the elders, one who had known Queen Aedeas in the days of her glory, leaned to the man beside him and murmured, "There is something in that girl's face that troubles me. I cannot say what it is, but I have seen it before, long ago." The other elders shushed him, but the words hung in the air, and more than one head turned to look again at the kneeling maid with new and uncertain eyes. The tension in the great hall was like the heavy stillness before a storm breaks. On one side knelt a bound servant, with nothing but her word to defend her. On the other sat a queen, in all her power and finery, demanding her destruction. And between them sat an old king torn in two, for his reason told him the evidence was plain. Yet his heart, which had wept at the maid's song only days before, refused to call her a thief. It was then that Queen Ojiugo, carried away by her own triumph and her old hidden fear, made the single mistake that would undo 25 years of lies. She strode down from the dais. She crossed the marble floor to where Chidinma knelt, and she reached out and seized the one thing the maid had always worn against her heart, the worn necklace of carved beads, now hanging visible at her throat. "And look at this," the queen sneered, holding it up for all to see. "Filthy peasant trinkets, worthless beads worn by a girl who dreams of jewels she will never own. This is what you are, Chidinma. This is all you will ever be. Beads and dust, my queen." "Wait, Ichi," Odera said suddenly, stepping forward, his old eyes wide. "Wait, do not." But it was too late. With a violent jerk of her hand, the queen tore the necklace from Chidinma's neck. The cord snapped. The carved beads burst apart and scattered across the marble floor of the throne hall, bouncing and rolling in every direction. And from inside the largest bead, the great carved pendant that had hung against Chidinma's heart since she was a child, something small and hard came loose, fell, and struck the marble with a single clear ring. It spun on the polished stone, around and around, while every eye in the hall followed it, and then it slowed, wobbled, and settled flat. Upon its surface, worn but unmistakable, was a carving, a leopard beneath a rising sun, the royal seal of the bloodline of Yumyus. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The hall was so silent that the settling of the seal upon the marble seemed to echo. It was old Ichi Odera who broke the silence. The ancient advisor stumbled forward, his hand pressed to his mouth, his eyes filling with tears. He sank to his knees beside the seal. He, the most honored elder of the kingdom, kneeling on the floor, and with shaking hands, he lifted the small bronze medallion into the light. "This seal," he whispered, and then, louder, his old voice cracking, so that all the hall could hear. "This seal? I know this seal. I held it in my own hands 25 years ago. I placed it myself around the neck of the infant princess, the daughter of our beloved Queen Aedeas. On the day of her naming, a gasp swept through the hall like wind through dry grass. It was lost," Ichi Odera went on, tears streaming down his weathered face, "the night the princess vanished. We believed it lost forever, as we believed the child lost forever. Here it is, in this hall, fallen from the necklace of this very maid." He turned, slowly, and looked at Chidinma kneeling, stunned, her hand pressed to her bare throat where the necklace had hung her whole life. "Child," the old man said, "the woman who raised you, the one who gave you this necklace, tell me, was she once a servant of this palace? Did she come to your village many years ago, a frightened woman with a baby that was not her own?" And Chidinma, her voice barely a whisper, said, She was the palace nursemaid. She fled here, long ago, with a child she swore to protect. She made me promise never to lose the necklace. She said one day it would tell me who I truly am." The hall erupted. For the truth, once it began to come, came all at once. The nursemaid whom Queen Ojiugo had paid to be rid of the infant princess all those years ago had not done the terrible thing she was bid to do. She had taken the silver. Yes, but somewhere on that dark road, with the warm and trusting weight of a sleeping child in her arms, Her heart had failed her in the best of ways. She could not abandon the baby. She could not do murder upon an innocent. And so she had run not to spend her silver in some far city, but to save a life. She had fled to a distant village, taken a new name, and raised the stolen princess as her own daughter, telling no one, trusting no one, hiding the royal seal inside a carved necklace so that one day, if the gods were kind, the truth might be proven. For more than 20 years she had kept that secret, loving the child as fiercely as any true mother ever loved. And when at last the fever took her, and she knew her time had come, she could not bring herself to speak the whole dangerous truth aloud, perhaps for fear, perhaps because there was no time. She had given the girl only the necklace, and a promise, and the words that would echo through the rest of Chidinma's life. One day it will tell you who you truly are. The lost princess had not died that long ago night. She had been kneeling all these years, scrubbing the floors of her own father's palace, guarded, without knowing it, by the love of a poor woman who had risked everything and asked for nothing. Chidinma understood it now. She understood why Mama Ekwe had always held her a little too tightly, why her eyes had sometimes filled with tears for no reason Chidinma could see, why she had guarded that worn necklace as though it were made of gold. It had been made of something far more precious than gold. It had been made of the truth. For a long moment Chidinma did not move. She knelt where she was, her hands still pressed to her bare throat, her mind unable to hold the enormity of what was happening around her. A princess. The word made no sense. She had carried water before dawn. She had been beaten and starved, and called nothing for as long as she could remember. How could she be the lost daughter of a queen? And yet, the song, the face that made the old king weep, the necklace her dying mother had begged her never to lose. One day it will tell you who you truly are. All of it, suddenly, fell into place like the final stone of an arch. And Chidinma began to tremble from head to foot. King Obiora rose from his throne. He came down the dais, like a man in a dream, his eyes fixed upon Chidinma's face. And now he saw it. Now he understood why her song had broken his heart, why her face had haunted him, why his old grief had stirred at the sight of her. He saw a daze in every line of her. He saw his daughter. "My child," he breathed, and his voice shattered. "My daughter! You are alive! You were here! You were here all this time, and I did not know you. I walked past you. I let them treat you so. Oh, forgive me. Forgive an old fool who buried his own heart and could not see what was before his eyes." And the king of Umos knelt upon the floor of his own throne hall and took the trembling, weeping maid into his arms. And the whole court wept with them, for there was not a heart in that hall, save one that was not broken open by the sight of a father holding the daughter he had mourned as dead for 25 years. As for Queen Ojugo, she stood frozen in the center of the hall, the broken cord still hanging from her fingers, her face the color of ash. Every eye turned slowly toward her, for she had not only falsely accused an innocent woman, she had, with her own hands, before the entire kingdom, revealed the very secret she had buried her own conscience to protect. The elders who looked at her now saw not a wronged queen, but a woman caught in a horror of her own making, and understanding crept across the hall like a cold dawn, that if this maid was the lost princess, then someone had stolen her away as a child, and the one who had gained the most from that theft was sitting in the dead queen's place. The truth she had buried for 25 years had clawed its way out of a servant's necklace, because she could not stop herself from tearing it apart. 1 year later, the kingdom of Umuse had been reborn. The investigation that followed the trial had laid bare everything. Confronted before the council of elders, the old crimes unraveled, one thread at a time: the bribed nursemaid, the false story of raiders, the grief that had killed Queen Adeus. Faced with the seal, the testimony, and the weight of her own undoing, Queen Ojugo could no longer hide behind her crown. She was stripped of her title and sent away from Umuse forever, to live out her remaining years in a distant village, far from the throne she had stolen and the daughter she had tried to erase. Mama Yuka, who had served her cruelty so faithfully, was dismissed from the palace in disgrace, and Chidinma, the maid who had carried water up the hill before dawn, who had scrubbed the floors and shared her last food and sung 2 lonely children, was revealed to all the kingdom as Princess Chidinma. the true and rightful daughter of King Obiora and the beloved Queen Adace. The transformation was a wonder to behold. The people who had walked past her for 8 years, without a glance, now bowed as she passed. The fine cloth she had once been given as a servant's gift was replaced by the royal robes of her bloodline. But the strangest and most beautiful thing of all was that the crown did not change her. She was still Chidinma. She still rose early. She still knew the names of every servant in the palace, and she still sat with the lonely children and sang to them the song that had been her mother's, the song that had betrayed her own royal blood without her ever knowing. She found Ida, the kitchen girl, who had shared her food in the hardest days, and raised her to be her closest companion in the royal household. She honored the old gateman who had told her stories, and to Ichiodera, the wise old adviser whose memory and whose courage had brought the truth into the light, she gave the highest place of honor at the throne, and she called him grandfather until the end of his long life. For 25 years, King Obiora had carried a grief that no medicine could touch. He had ruled like a man already half in the grave, his heart buried beside his lost wife and daughter. And now, in the twilight of his life, the gods had given his daughter back to him. Color returned to his face. Laughter returned to his halls. The people said the king had aged backward, that the daughter he thought dead had brought him back to life. And as for the necklace, the worn cord of carved beads that had hidden a princess's birthright for 25 years, Chidinma had it restored with care, and she wore it still, every day, against her heart, just as she always had. For the gold and coral of her royal station meant little to her. But the simple beads, given to her by a poor, brave woman who had risked everything to keep her safe, those she would treasure until the end of her days. In the months after her crowning, the people of Yumyus came to understand what a rare thing had been given to them. For Princess Chidinma did not rule as one who had forgotten where she came from. She had carried water before dawn, and so she ordered that no servant in the palace should be made to labor from darkness to darkness as she once had. She had been starved as a punishment, and so she commanded that no one under that roof should ever again be denied their food to break their spirit. She had knelt in the sun for a crime she did not commit, and so she sat in judgment with a patience and a mercy that the kingdom had never known, listening to the poorest petitioner as carefully as the highest chief. The market women blessed her name. The farmers in the far villages told stories of the maid who became a princess, and mothers held their daughters close and whispered that goodness was not weakness, that a kind heart could survive any cruelty and, in the end, inherit a throne. On the night she was crowned heir to the throne of Yumyus, Chidinma stood beneath the stars in the courtyard where she had once swept the dust before dawn, and she pressed the necklace to her lips, just as she had on so many lonely nights. "You kept your promise, Mama Equi," she whispered to the woman who had raised her. "And so did I. It told me, in the end, who I truly am." The wind moved softly through the Iroko tree, and somewhere, Sefelt mothers were smiling down upon her, the one who gave her life, and the one who gave her everything else. And so the kingdom of Yumyus learned, in the most unforgettable way, a lesson it would tell its children for generations, that no station is too low for greatness to hide within it, that cruelty carries the seed of its own undoing, and that the truth, however deep it is buried, will always find the light in the end. The maid they had mocked had become their princess. The woman they had dragged to her knees now sat in honor at the right hand of the throne, and the necklace that a frightened woman had once tied around an infant's neck had, in the fullness of time, told a kingdom exactly who that child had always been. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the truth always finds its way home. Subscribe to our family, and I will see you in the next tale.